Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Environmental Justice Program. My name is Marcy, and I'm a librarian with the Anne Arundel County Public Library, and I'll be your host for the program today. We're excited to host this program as part of the Maryland STEM Festival. The Maryland STEM Festival is an annual event that celebrates all things science, technology, engineering, and math each fall. This year's festival runs until November 14th, and you can find more events on their website at marylandstemfestival.org. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to the Watershed Steward Academy of Anne Arundel County for hosting this program with us, in partnership with us, excuse me. We'd also like to thank the Anne Arundel County Public Library Foundation for the support of all of our amazing programs. During today's program, we will have some time at the end to answer your questions. Please share anything you would like to ask our presenter in the chat or Q&A. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator for this program today, Camara Thomas-Wilhite.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm really excited to host this panel and just of my friends, really, and I'm great to have this wonderful conversation tonight about environmental justice. I will introduce the panelists once we get our slides up, and so you know who you'll be hearing from tonight.
Romero, would you like me to do a poll now?
Sure, that would be great. Before we do introductions, we're going to do a poll just to kind of read the room, see who's here, why you decided to join. So thank you, Noelle, for launching that.
Just about everybody has participated, and this first question was about why you joined us tonight. And I'm going to end the poll now and share the results with all of you. So about 18% said this is new to me, I'm excited to learn more. 37%, which is the greatest number, said I have a basic understanding of environmental justice, but want to deepen what I know. 17% of you said you want to find out how to get involved in local efforts. And a bunch of you are looking for more resources because you want to bring environmental justice to your communities. Camara, would you like me to start sharing the slides now?
Yeah, we also had some responses in the chat as well about some school projects and making up some STEM requirements. So thank you for being here, even though it might be for school. Oh, well.
So I'm going to try to share my screen now. And Carmera, can you let me know if you see the presentation?
Not seeing it yet.
Okay, let me try that again. Sorry about that, guys. Able to see it now?
Yes, thank you. Great. So again, welcome to this panel. My name is Camara Thomas-Wilhite. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy, and also the Director of Urban Conservation Initiatives at the Conservation Fund. And I am your moderator for tonight. We have Ramon Palencia Calvo, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, as a panelist. Kate Fritz, the Executive Director of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Randy Rao, C-Stream Director for the Chesapeake Research Consortium. Hanna Mulai, Chesapeake Bay Foundation Student Leader. And Michael Archer, PhD student, University of Maryland School of Public Health. Thank you all for being panelists tonight. I'm going to actually hand it over to Yan to set the stage for us.
Thanks, Carmera. And thanks to all the attendees. Wow, 155 folks. I'm really humbled to be amongst all of the panelists here who have been doing this work for much longer than I have. And I'm happy to go on to kind of set us up and frame us around environmental justice. So you can go to the next slide, Noel. Cool. So I'm really glad that the poll results showed that the majority of folks, 37% I think it was, are familiar with the term environmental justice and here to learn more and boost their literacy on it. You can go to the next slide. In general, what I'm going to talk about is just briefly, what does the phrase environmental justice mean? What are the issues, especially here in Maryland and in Anne Arundel County? And then what does it look like? So we can go to the next slide. So kind of the go-to workhorse definition of environmental justice is this one from the EPA, which is the environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. That's a mouthful. And really, it's the workhorse definition because it's been around for almost 30 years, and it covers a lot of ground in just 30 or 40 words. The key things that I always like to pull out when talking about environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement, and particularly even stripping it down to just meaningful involvement. There's a lot of ways that involvement is used when we're talking about the environment and we're talking about preservation and conservation, but is that involvement meaningful? How do we define whether or not that involvement is meaningful or not? Well, that brings us to who is being involved. So that's, the people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. Do all of these voices have a seat at the table? Are all of these voices being meaningfully engaged? And when we say meaningful, I like to throw out that not only are we listening we're asking questions and asking for these folks to join the conversation, but also listening to what they have to say and implementing what they have to say. That's what meaningful means to me. And I'd love for folks to throw into the chat kind of how you define or think about this meaningful involvement piece. And then what are we meaningfully involving these people, all people in? Then that's the development, the implementation, and the enforcement of our environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And again, the development part is key, getting this in on the front end at the ground floor before these actions actually go into place, so we can make sure that these policies, these regulations, these laws are just from the beginning because they've been informed by these voices from the beginning. And then not just having folks in on the planning phase, but also through the implementation. How can we make sure that those voices are used throughout the life of the law, the regulation, the policies? And then also if there is any kind of violation that takes place, how can we make sure that the people who have been violated are still in the discussion when we're discussing the retribution and the distributive justice that should follow? So that's kind of a whole lot of academic talking around environmental justice. On the next slide, we'll bring it down a little bit to kind of Plainspeak, or actually the slide after this. But for right now, we'll look at some examples of environmental justice issues in Maryland. And I think, Noel, I kind of set up the slide weird, but you can go ahead and click through maybe 5 times so that the photos show up. But yeah, so when we're talking about environmental justice issues in Maryland, and again, please blow up the chat and, and any that you don't see on this list, put them in the chat. But we've got traffic related air pollution, incinerators, power plants, landfills. These are all, which also contribute to air quality or poor air quality in our state. We've got water issues, especially with proximity to the bay, impaired waterways. You've got sedimentation, nutrient runoff, stormwater decay, and stormwater runoff into our surface waterways. We've got crumbling infrastructure. We've got, and when we're talking about infrastructure, the kind of highlight when we're talking about EJ is often lead exposure, historic lead exposure, but it also applies to mold, right? And a big EJ population that is often overlooked is renters. When we're talking about, you know, distribution of power, and we should think about, and we should talk about landowners versus, you know, temporary residents, tenants and renters. We've got CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, primarily on the Eastern Shore, food insecurity throughout the state, urban heat island effects, and more climate forcing throughout the state, but being in urban heat context being felt, you know, most acutely in Baltimore City and close to the Beltway, and then also when we're looking at nuisance flooding, you know, on the Eastern Shore and close to our waterways. Lack of green space in our urban areas as well, and sea level rise and nuisance flooding, which I kind of preemptively noted as well. I'm going to click into the chat and just see some other things that you great minds have shared. So mining excavation, absolutely. Cohesive public transportation, non-motorized transportation, walkability, absolutely. These are all great, not great EJ issues, great examples of EJ issues.
Access has been another one to public spaces, to green.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Carmera. Awesome. Noelle, you can go ahead and click maybe 2 more times to get us to the next slide. Boom, cool. So here's my Plainspeak, which I borrow from Dr. Bunyan Bryant from the University of Michigan. And so when we're talking about environmental justice, it's important to kind of think of environmental justice is a movement as much as it is any other kind of ideal or you know, any kind of goal that we set. But it's not just the goal, it's also how we get there. It's, you know, it's all encompassing. So when we're talking about environmental justice, Dr. Bryant refers to these cultural norms, values, rules, regulations, behaviors, policies, decisions to support sustainable communities where people can interact with confidence that their environment is safe, nurturing, and productive. So again, that's a mouthful, but it really does show that we're looking at a holistic system when we're talking about environmental justice. It's not only about the bad things. It's not only about pollution. It's not only about, you know, in access to power and to, you know, resources. It's also about amenities. It's also about building up communities and building sustainable communities. And we see that environmental justice is served when people can actually realize their highest potential without experiencing the isms. And when we say the isms, we know what we're talking about. We're talking about racism. We're talking about sexism, transphobia, other bigotries. When people are not encountering these barriers to their highest potential, that's when we can say we've reached environmental justice. Environmental justice is supported by decent paying and safe jobs, quality schools and recreation, decent housing, adequate healthcare, democratic decision-making. Not to get too bogged down, but you can't talk about environmental justice without talking about politics. You know, it's started in politics, got us here, and we have to use politics and democracy to get us out. And so democratic decision-making, you know, is a big part of environmental justice. Personal empowerment, communities free of violence, drugs, and poverty. And then ultimately, when we're talking about environmental justice as a destination, we're looking at both our cultural and biological diversities being respected and highly revered, and where distributive justice prevails. And if you're not familiar with the term distributive justice, basically that means that there's kind of a like for like balancing, where just an example using landfills, right? So landfills, as a society, we've decided that it's appropriate to consolidate all of our waste into single places that are often out of sight and out of mind. So that's an example of that's the opposite of distributive justice, because we're taking we're externalizing all of that waste often onto other communities, often Black communities, low wealth communities. And so an example of a distributive justice fix for that is, well, for one, not creating as much waste in the first place, but also making sure that, these landfills are not as consolidated and heavily concentrated in Black and brown communities and other low wealth communities, but actually, more distributed, you can use the word there, amongst the people who are creating the waste. And let's see, checking the chat again.
Yeah, I think the default for the chat is to the host and panelists. If you want everyone to see your comment, you do have to change the to button to everyone. I'll just highlight some of the things here. Again, someone looks like Steve, actually. Steve Robbie says, thank you for the definition, especially the positive definition of environmental justice. There's always been a focus on the negative side, the injustice. So it's really aspirational to think about it in that way. I think that there's also just examples that were circulating that not everyone could see, of some examples of some of the environmental issues, thinking about healthy, unhealthy exposure, next to major highways and pathways, lower public safety in low income communities, thinking about public housing in that case as well, and just lack of water access to people, and some of the other examples that you already mentioned. So if you do want to, again, chat to everyone, make sure you change that default, but I will try my best to highlight some of the things that are being said. But thanks, Ian, for that.
Actually, Carmera, I just wanted to jump in and mention that I think AACPL has settings adjusted so that people, when they're chatting, can only chat to the host presenters, and that's just something that they do for this style of presentation. So I'm going to be watching the chat. Others will be watching the chat too, and we'll try to make sure that if there are questions that don't get addressed in the panel discussion, that we'll be able to elevate those and raise those when that discussion wraps up, so that there can be some Q&A.
Thank you so much. Back to you, Ian, sorry.
No, absolutely. So just to kind of sign off here on the introduction to EJ, some really great resources, and the rest of the panelists have also compiled or provided a bunch of amazing resources that that Carmera and Noel have also compiled for all of the audience members. I don't plan to go through these one by one. You'll have the slides. So I'm happy to turn it over to you, Carmera.
Great, thank you. So I'll kick our Q&A off with some questions, and then we will definitely take questions from the audience. But to start, I would love all the panelists to share what initiatives your organizations are taking to overcome barriers and fight environmental injustice. No particular order, but if someone wants to speak up first and just share any initiative that your organization is working on to addressing environmental injustice.
Well, I'm already primed and ready, so I guess
Go for it.
Keep going.
And I'll kick it to the next person. That's right.
Sure. So I think in the bio it said University of Maryland. Specifically, I'm working at the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health, which is at the University of Maryland School of Public Health, and our director is Dr. Jacoby Wilson. And so what our team what our team works on in general is a science empowerment model, which basically utilizes and leverages community engagement and community empowerment to conduct science and also to bring resources to communities. So examples of that are community-based air quality monitoring, where we provide training to community members and based on the concerns that community members have. This is specifically talking about air quality and air pollution, but in other communities where that's not as much of a concern, then we pivot to work towards that. But specifically using the air pollution model, we provide low-cost monitoring equipment. We train community members and residents to be citizen scientists and community scientists to collect their own data and then to use that data for advocacy. And it's it's a little bit cheesy, but when I say science empowerment, it's spelled with an I-N, you know, like a trademark term, instead of E-M. And Dr. Jacoby Wilson, you know, that's his branding, but it has meaning. And when we make the difference between empowerment and empowerment, usually when we're talking about empowering with an EM, it's giving power to people, or even giving back power. But with an empowerment model, IN, we acknowledge that community members, folks, are already the experts in their own context. They already have their lived experiences and they already have power. We just need to connect that power and maybe signal boost that power so that the people in legislation and the people, you know, who are making decisions recognize that power. And so that's what we focus on. The community air quality monitoring is one example of that. We are also working on developing policy platforms, working with legislators, working with community members to bring all of these voices to the table to work on policy platforms on environmental justice. We also do a lot of spatial work, mapping GIS to identify areas of environmental injustice and then drive resources in that direction. And so that's kind of just broad strokes, some of the stuff that we work on at Siege.
Thank you. Key, how about if I ask you to go next to share some initiatives that the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay is working on, especially at the regional level in the Bay watershed?
Sure. Thanks, Carmera. I'm so excited to be joining this panel this evening. So thanks for the invitation and thanks to everybody joining on. The Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year as a regional nonprofit that has been bringing together communities, companies, and conservationists to restore the lands and waters of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. There's, I guess, two things I kind of want to talk about specifically around some of the work that we as a regional organization, we have 4 offices. Our headquarters is here in Annapolis, but we work in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and Richmond, Virginia as well. So I want to talk about kind of two different things we're working on. One is an internal piece of our work, and then one is more external facing and how our programming shows up. Internally, we just conducted an equity assessment of the organization, which assessed all of our staff, our 45 staff members, and all of our 21 board members around perceptions of the organization around culture and where biases might show up, or about microaggressions showing up in the organization. So really getting a feel of the temperature of the organization in terms of diversity and or in terms of inclusivity and equity in the organization. So that we've been really focusing on that. There'll be a set of recommendations for us to continue to work on. So as an organization, we're looking at our own internal biases and trying to understand and break some of those historic systems down to become a more inclusive and equitable organization internally. And then externally, we've been working with partners at Bowie State University, just over in the next county from us in Prince George's County in Maryland. And we've been working with them to help deliver some extra curricular content related to the Chesapeake Bay. Bowie State University, when we met them a couple of years ago, they had a chemistry professor who was incredibly interested in getting his students to understand community science and water quality monitoring. And that's something we've been helping build their capacity to do. They didn't have an environmental science program, and here we are in 2021, they just kicked off an environmental science program. So we're helping to build a pipeline of professionals of color into the environmental movement, which is a historically very white movement. And so offering those opportunities for professional growth and development and networking is one of our external programs we're working on as well.
Great, thank you. Ramon, I'd like you to speak a little bit about the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And I know that a lot of the research that Yan and Dr. Wilson collect is used during the legislative session and also to, influence policy. So if you could speak to that a little bit, that would be great.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity of being here today, and to all the co-panelists and the attendees, great attendance. So yes, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters is a nonprofit organization. We're based in Annapolis, and we use political action, advocacy, education to pass equitable environmental legislation to benefit our communities and our environment, right? And yeah, so we have I guess we work in that space, which is politics, advocacy, education, and you know, we also have, so we have those tools to hold our elected officials accountable to make sure that they pass that sound legislation that benefits communities. But we also work in this other space where we endorse candidates and support candidates that are pro-environment, to make sure that they are elected and become part of that of those candidates that support the environment. So that's one of the spaces that's where we operate. But another thing that I wanted to bring to this conversation is, you know, in 2014 we started a program, the CHISPA program. You know, as it was mentioned, it was the realization that the environmental movement, not just in Maryland but around the United States, it was very homogeneous, white, middle class led. So we started our CHISPA program, which is a program that works with Latino communities. It's a program that we build the leadership of Latino communities to make sure that they have a strong voice on the vis-a-vis the decisions that affect their lives, health, environment. You know, that's when we started our CHISPA program, and through our CHISPA program, we have graduated over the years about 100 promotores. Promotores are community leaders, where they go through this training and to learn more about the environment, environmental justice, to really make those connections between the environment and health, economics, how the environment, a good sustainable environment can support, you know, good paying jobs, healthy communities, access to green spaces. So that's that background. And after they graduate, they go on their communities and start projects or different work groups to advance environmental issues, environmental justice in their community. So that's one of the things that we are very proud of in terms of expanding the environmental movement, you know, supporting the communities that we serve, very specifically on advancing that bottom-up approach. Sometimes we're used to, you know, having those solutions brought to the community in a top-down approach. I think that this is the solution that benefits, serves your community better. But, you know, for us, it's an opportunity to really create that leadership that tells our legislators or decision makers, those are the solutions that benefit our communities, benefits our families, and this is what we should be supporting at this point. So yeah, that's some of the work that we've been doing vis-a-vis the environment. And yes, we also have this our environmental scorecards and report cards, where, you know, accountability is a big piece of the puzzle, making sure that we hold our elected officials accountable for the votes, their decisions vis-a-vis environmental justice. So those are two tools that we use widely to really hold them accountable, to make sure that they put their votes where their remarks are.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Havana first, and then Randy. Havana, you are a student leader with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. You are working with youth leaders like yourself to be an advocate, also hold our legislators accountable. So I'd like you to speak to that a little bit. And then Randy, you culminate a lot of the different things. So I would love you to be last on that question, and then we'll kick it to the next one.
Yeah, so I'm a student leader, and basically our group is just a bunch of like high school students that want to help the Bay, and I joined because I thought it would be a great organization to also educate myself, which I found a lot in this program. And the main efforts for this organization, for the student leader organization, is to build advocacy, awareness, and action. And so basically, it's a great like networking group because you can do so much. Like there's so many different students doing many different projects at one time. So for example, I was on a like committee to build like a watershed outdoor Bill of Rights. And basically this like Bill of Rights is something that we hope to someday get passed. But it's kind of like a Bill of Rights stating things that we want to see in place and see a change. Like we want to see that everybody has access to clean water, clean air, and green spaces, just to name a few things. So that's a special committee that I was on. But other than that, the organization as a whole is really amazing, because what we like to do is we'll go out and kind of sort of like put like flyers out for people to read about the organization. Like a few months ago, we did like a lot of a tabling event to sort of advertise for the organization. And I joined during COVID, so since then we haven't done as much as we have in the past. But in the past, I know that the organization has participated in the climate like strikes. I know in like downtown Annapolis. So it's just a really great organization, also just for educating yourself. Like I've learned so much about environmental justice, and also like the legal side of things. Like I've met with some lawyers from the foundation, and they've like helped tremendously, like, and taught me a lot of things about issues that are going on. So it's just a great organization overall. Yeah.
Thank you, Hanna. And Randy, you are doing a lot of the work on the ground with folks in the community, but also with the Chesapeake Research Consortium, bringing young people into this field as well. And I know Kate mentioned about exposure to this type of career. So can you share a little bit about your work and how you are overcoming barriers as well?
Yes, sure. And greetings, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for having this event. It's a very wonderful event. Well, first off, I work for the Chesapeake Student Recruitment, Early Advisement, and Mentoring Program. That's through the Chesapeake Research Consortium. And we also are celebrating 50 years of existence, having launched in 1972. More recently, the C-Stream program is fairly a branch of the Diversity Action Work Group, as it was created or advocated for from that space. And having myself be having been an inaugural original Diversity Action Work Group member, to be managing this program is kind of somewhat of a kind of dreamy, but it just goes to show you how important it is that we give people in positions of power kind of precedent over some of these positions. More recently, like as I mentioned, the C-Stream program is fairly a new program. It's about 5 years old, 3 to 5 years old. And basically it seeks to address some of the historically excluded from the environmental field, and are therefore currently underrepresented in environmental research and management professions. So we host internship programs in partnership with NOAA, EPA, and other federal and non-federal organizations, as well as the Chesapeake Bay program. Just to give a good, we have about 9 or 10 per year. We had 9 last summer. And projects range from different types of databases, creations, to even more recently, some DEIJ work around environmental restoration. So some pretty important work. I also work independently on the side doing some tree planting advocacy work, organizing, giving technical assistance to different underrepresented and underengaged business owners who would like to get into the field of environmental restoration. So. And I also sit as well on the City of Annapolis Environmental Commission. And right now we have a memo on its way through titled Environmental Justice. And one thing that, some things that would be involved in that are just like this example right here today, creating opportunities to break down some of these cultural barriers and some of these historically maldistribution of wealth resources to some of our more vulnerable communities as it relates to climate change, flooding, and coastal resiliency, especially here in this low landing, drowning per day area in Annapolis, Maryland, Anne Arundel County. So that's about it. Carmera, kick it back to you.
Thank you. So I am looking at the time and also looking at the amount of questions in the chat. So I'm wondering if we want to answer some of those. And then if we need to, I can go back to my questions. But let me. So one of the questions first is addressed to Havana about any projects that you can tie for middle school students. So what would you tackle that would have the most impact, and what issues do you focus on that you concentrate on the most? And then I'll ask another question after that.
So the student leader program is for high school students, but I know as a whole, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has a lot of different opportunities for younger students. I don't know them like specifically, but if you go on the website, you'll find it. But I do know a few other organizations I work with locally, I think would be a great place for middle school students, such as the Severn River Association. I've done a lot of work with them during the summer, like testing water quality samples out on boats. But I do know they have other opportunities if you look into that. And also the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater. That's a really cool organization with lots of projects. I think you do need like a parent or guardian with you, but it is such a cool organization to get involved with. There's like a ton of different projects, from like owl watching to like going out in the marshes. So I think that's a great way. And then specifically, an area that has like always kind of sparked my interest is the issue of like runoff streaming into our bay, and also into our rivers. And so for me, like I've been really interested in like making riparian buffers, and kind of like the study behind that. So I guess that's like an issue that is I'm really passionate about, but also I think a great way for middle schoolers or anybody really to get involved, and an easy way to get involved is by like building oyster reefs or getting involved in some sort of way with the Build a Reef program. I think it's also very much like a summer thing to do, but I do think there's other ways you can get involved throughout the year.
Thank you. This question is for all the panelists. It was asked in the chat, what are some of the top environmental justice issues in Anne Arundel County and Annapolis specifically? I know Yan shared a really long list, but maybe from your experience or also from your work, what do you believe is the top issue that should be addressed?
So I can start there. I mentioned one of the areas. Oh, sorry, Randy, you had your hand up.
Oh, no, I just put it up. Go ahead. I'll go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off.
No.
So being that most of my direct work is not in Anne Arundel County, I had to do a little research for tonight. One of the things I mentioned that we do is spatial mapping. And so developing these GIS, these web mapping tools to kind of show us environmental injustice hotspots. And so one of those tools is called the Maryland EJ Screen. It builds off of a federal EPA EJ Screen program. And so I went looking through our Maryland EJ tool, and what I found was that there isn't a huge, like bright red light flashing in Anne Arundel County per se, especially in context to the directly neighboring Prince George's County, which is where I do a lot of my work. So when I did a little bit more digging, which is a great kind of moral of the story in one perspective, because whenever you're using any kind of tool, you never just rely just on the one tool. You use it to then dig further and kind of point the flashlight further. So when I did some more digging, I dug up some stuff with respect to Patuxent River and communities living along Patuxent River and I think Sands Road, with some gravel pit issues, some traffic proximity issues, and then also, as I said at the beginning, some tenant and mold issues. Now, again, I am in my ivory tower, plugging away at this stuff kind of remotely. And so I definitely rely on, this is a perfect example of where I would rely on community expertise and community voices to really tell me what's going on the ground, as Randy might be about to do.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, definitely things like replacing some of the old infrastructure with some of that gray infrastructure with more of a green infrastructure would be smart. I find that a lot of, Anne Arundel County and Annapolis, Annapolis has the most public housing communities per capita in the United States of America. And Anne Arundel County is right in the shadows of Annapolis. And so I think that a lot of public safety issues are concerned, and as well as access to green spaces and waterways. But not just that, but also breaking up some of the monopolization that is taking place as it relates to environmental restoration bids that go out for construction or small construction, as well as things like waterways, cabs, and things like that that take place on our streams and waterways. So looking at different opportunities where we can hire more professionals that have some secured background in some of these type of things, some training programs that may assist with those as well.
Thank you. Kate or Ramon, do you have any ideas to that as well? Or yeah, I'd love you.
I'll piggyback on what Randy said, and Randy's going to be very familiar with the example I'm about to bring up, but just in relation to needing to improve our infrastructure, the Alliance worked in partnership with Watershed Stewards Academy and Broadneck United Methodist, or I'm sorry, Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church over near Cape St. Clair with some serious flooding issues and some disproportionate impact to the property because it was at the bottom of the watershed. It was in receipt of all the storm water that was that was untreated uphill, and there was a lot of erosion going on in the historic African American cemetery of the church, and we were losing ancestors. We were losing literal history in Anne Arundel County, and so I think flooding. Not just shoreline flooding, sea level rise flooding, but you see greater, stronger storms happening that are bringing a lot of stormwater flooding, which are flooding, disproportionately flooding properties that were, kind of they were the marginalized properties. They were downstream. They were wet all the time, and that's classically where you see a lot of our communities of color have cited churches, houses, et cetera. And so that is a huge issue as our county continues to develop. I think it's something we have to be cognizant as we redevelop spaces, and that type of flooding is not unique to Anne Arundel County, unfortunately, but it is a major problem around Anne Arundel County.
Yeah, absolutely, especially after this last storm that we had that was very prevalent.
And I'll just add, just a few days ago in Annapolis, there was like 4 or 5 shootings in the city. And I think that and I have a hard time in different rooms and spaces making the case that public safety is an environmental justice concern as it relates to our people. So I really feel like, that's something that can really be more attention made to that. The same amount of attention that people give and raise awareness and emails and about things that relate to a waterway being damaged by construction and sediment going into the streams. I would like to see that same amount of, intense presence made about issues that relate to things like public safety and things like that. So we'll throw that in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll let you go, and then I have a question, kind of another question.
Yeah, and just to kind of circle back to the framing of all this, the absence of environmental injustices is also an environmental justice issue. So when we're talking about hoarding of power and hoarding of amenities, you have these amenity clusters, in certain areas of the state and certain areas of counties that are not distributed. These amenities and these resources and this power is not distributed throughout the rest of the county, that's also an environmental justice issue. So especially in the context of Annapolis, the seat of government for the state, I think that's a very critical thing to acknowledge and give voice to when we're talking about the difference between Anne Arundel and Prince George's County, or even within Anne Arundel County, more affluent areas and less affluent areas.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So this question is going to be a blend of a question that was asked in the chat and also a question that I have as well. So my question is about being an advocate and how you get more involved in your community. And the question in the chat that kind of speaks to that is, how do you hold your local government accountable? So thinking about the advocacy side of it and getting community members involved in the process, and then also holding our leaders, policymakers, decision makers accountable to those things, especially prioritizing environmental justice and injustice issues. So I'd love for Ramon to start, and then anyone else can follow.
Thank you. So I guess one of the first things to do is just, go to our scorecard and see how your legislators are doing in terms of environmental justice and environment as a whole. That's a good accountability tool that we have, and it's on our website, it's public, and I'll drop on the chat the link. But I think oftentimes we talk about, at least with the work that I do serving the Latino community, we talk about, advocating from zero to the legislative session and being an advocate in Annapolis, and that's the road, and that's what a lot of times we see happening, going to a community and trying to get them to Annapolis within a couple of months and be experts there. So I think that one of the things that is very important, at least for me, is how can we start making a difference at the local level, participating, in our local elections, in our local boards, in our the city council, the Board of Education. It's another big forum where community members can express their views and advocate for a fair environment, a just environment, and to advance environmental justice. I think that those are some of the entry points that sometimes we fail to consider, and I think it's a good opportunity for community members to start advocating. But yeah, that advocacy, it's key. But and also providing those opportunities to participate, creating those opportunities. We as environmental advocates, as environmental organizations, we have that responsibility to provide those opportunities for community members to participate, either, creating those advocacy opportunities, connecting them with decision makers, providing opportunities to get more information about the issues, to follow up on issues. Sometimes you see a race to pass legislation, but there's not that much effort on following the legislation, making sure that the implementation is equitable. That how can we, after you pass the legislation, there's still that process, and how to community members are part of that process, that the implementation is equitable and all the benefits trickle down to the community and to the communities that most need it. I think that is also very important.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I think that was a very key point. In the beginning, when we were talking about the definitions of meaningful engagement, but meaningful development, making sure that we're the awareness is there, education, the advocacy piece, and then the implementation to follow up throughout the whole process. I think that's very important. Thank you so much for that. Would anybody else like to answer that question about advocacy and also how to hold your leaders accountable? Kate, I saw you take off mute, and then Randy, and then Yan.
Just want to put a quick plug in Anne Arundel County. One of the ways that you can get involved with your local government is through the Citizens Environmental Commission, which was just recently chartered about 2 years ago by County Executive Pittman. Carmera and myself serve on the Environmental Commission. It's a great place to lift up challenges for the 12 representatives of the different watersheds in the county, to listen to citizen challenges and opportunities. It's a place for you to weigh in on long-range planning documents like the Green Infrastructure Plan that's really helping shape where and how the county conserves and restores land and other activities. So I'm going to drop, I'll drop a link in the chat. Maybe Noel, we can put this link in our resource document as well, how you can get on the email list to be involved, just to join meetings or submit issues. So I just wanted to put that plug in, Carmera.
Thank you. Randy was next, and then Yin.
Yeah, I would just mention your environmental commissions are good places to start because they have the ability to have the ear of many city and county officials. You can speak through them in a sense about any and all your environmental concerns. What I'm learning that is I'm using the Environmental Commission to advocate for funding for different projects and partnerships and solving some of these direct problems. Another thing the commission is good for is getting a consensus for why some of these environmental issues exist, because that's a very big problem in the sense of creating an agreement amongst different environmental scientists and professionals. So that's a big part of that. I'll give you a quick example is things like snakes, invasive snakes in housing. Some people may look at that as an environmental issue, some people may not. And so that's an important thing to figure out how to get a scope for. Another organization that I often work with is called Earth Force, and I'm an Earth Force facilitator. But Earth Force is an organization that works mostly a lot in the school systems, but also in the community with youth to teach them the art of creating a democratic approach, project-based learning. So they are able to learn how to write letters to politicians, create an avenue for communicating what their issues are in their environments and schools and communities and things like that. So if you're not aware of who they are, I would check them out. It's called Earth Force.
Awesome.
Sure, and the Environmental Commission that Kate mentioned is another thing I learned about today when I was doing my research. So I'm glad you shouted that out and echoing what Randy said as well. Another thing on the topic of accountability, I find that a lot of times it's good to know who to hold accountable and kind of who to shake down when someone needs to get shaken down, but also we have to hold ourselves accountable to raise our own literacy and knowledge of the issues. And to do that, there's going to be a wealth of resources coming out of tonight that, again, Carmera and Noel have compiled with the panelists' help. So reading up on those resources is a first step. And I, based on what we've been getting in the chat, I know a lot of folks in the audience are way past that already, and I'm happy for that. But the first step is really becoming more aware of what environmental justice is, and specifically what are the issues facing your communities. And then from there, what to hold these commissions accountable on. A really great question to ask any government agency is, what is your environmental justice plan? I am of the belief that every public office should have an environmental justice plan because, as we outlined in the beginning, environmental justice touches every system in society. And that's because racism and classism and bigotry touches every system in our society. And so you can start there. You can ask your public library, which I've been super impressed with public libraries' response, to social justice and activism in the last 2 years and throughout the pandemic. But you can ask your public library, you can ask your Board of Public Works, you can ask your facilities or sanitation, any office that you already are engaged with in some way or another. Ask them what their environmental justice plan is. And if they don't have one, then you can bring that up at the commission and say, hey, commission, if you're looking for something to do, this office doesn't have an EJ plan. Maybe you can help them out. But I really, we really have to get on ourselves to be accountable, to actually learn the issues and then go out and bring it to our officials. Or maybe not and then one and then the other. In tandem, do both.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, education, being a lifelong learner is very important of many issues, and especially ones that affect you and your community. I think that is a very great way to put that. We are about 5 minutes out at the end of our program. This time has gone by so fast. There are many questions, and we will be sure to share the resources that we're mentioning. Noelle will send that out, and also some reflection and contact information for our panelists to answer some of the questions that aren't getting answered right now in this moment. But before we close, I do have a very a closing question to think about, kind of where we are right now, what we've talked about, and kind of where we're headed in the future. So if each of the panelists could answer this question, what are your hopes? What are your aspirations for this issue, and how it can be addressed in the future? So thinking about some of the challenges that we have and where we're headed, especially as we're raising this issue up tonight, and all of the 100 and almost 50 people here are very engaged and asking really wonderful questions. They're, I would say, doing their part to learn and bring awareness to their own community. But what do you see in the future for the environmental justice movement? And in no particular order, but I will actually start with Havana, since she hasn't spoken in a while. So Havana, you're the youngest panelist here, but we would love to hear your aspirations and hopes.
Yes. So is this specifically just for like environmental justice, or is this environmental science and as a whole?
And environmental justice and in general.
Okay. I guess for like environmental science as a whole, I'd like to see more of like more schools implementing environmental science as a core curriculum class, starting at a younger age than just high school. And then on an environmental justice level, I think there needs to be more talk about what environmental lawyers are, and what they do, and also have that implemented and have maybe speakers come to schools or bring more awareness about this kind of job and what we are doing in that. So yeah.
Thank you. Randy, do you want to go next?
Sure. And you said what are some?
What are your hopes and aspirations for the environmental justice movement? Kind of where we were, where we are now, where we're headed.
My hopes is that funding starts to flow back into communities that are more so underserved, underrepresented, under-resourced through environmental restoration or environmental isms, whether it be training programs, grant funding, trash cleanups, or different, tree planting projects, but using the environmental industry as a means to pouring resources back into some communities that have been historically traumatized. And much of it has been issued through environmental justice best poor practices. And then I would also like to see more preference made for minority-owned businesses and entrepreneurs to do environmental work. I think that it's for so long been such a lopsided, monopolized entity, and so many other people have seemingly, been very successful for many, many years and decades. And it's time that some of that is a little bit more balanced. And because of the so many years of the imbalance, I feel like it should be made some type of way of strategic preference. And also through video. I think that there should be more video and oral interpretation and capturing stories where people can tell their story and become the owners of their own narrative. So often we have a lot of organizations that come in and, want to take ownership of some of those activities, but we need to put the ownership back into the people and letting and hearing their voice and seeing what they think versus us trying to say what they think. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you. Kate, Yan, Ramon. That's be my order.
I am hopeful around mentoring, and there's a real responsibility of the older generation to help mentor the younger generation. It is our responsibility to make sure that if there are kids of color who are interested in learning how to hunt, that we take them hunting with us and we mentor them in that. That we mentor them in so many ways and help give access to communities of color that they've been denied because of systemic racism, and especially related to access to green space. So I'm hopeful that we become more of a serving humanity, I guess, that we continue to serve each other and serve really the future of our planet together. And I'm hopeful, as one of those people that is getting up to be one of the older generations, that we really do share our experiences and intentionally, and we bring new people into our movement and into our work, whether it's through recreating, whether it's through professional workplaces, et cetera. But I'm hopeful for that for the future.
Thank you, Kate.
Definitely echoing everyone that's spoken before. I kind of put it in the context of 30 years ago. So this is in 2021. We're now 30 years away from the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, which was this giant moment in the environment that really launched the environmental justice movement in the U.S. And from that, we got that EPA, definition of environmental justice. We got Executive Order 12898, which incorporated environmental justice and environmental justice accountability in all government offices at the federal level and in all offices receiving federal monies. And then we had a really rough, 25 years trying to make progress in environmental justice, and we did it. And I say we, fully taking credit for all of the people that have come before me in this movement. But we've made a lot of really giant strides. And now here we are again with the Biden administration, another watershed federal moment for environmental justice, where a lot of development is being made, a lot of promises in the development phase. Remember, going back to definition, we're talking about development, implementation, and enforcement. So there's a lot. We're in the development phase now with a lot of this EJ policy and climate justice policy, where community members are being tapped to provide those stories, to provide that testimony and be engaged. We need to make sure that we see it through the implementation and through the enforcement. And so that's my hope for the future, that we don't get complacent with, we're really happy to be in the place and in the administration where we are right now. We need to, continue pressure and make sure that the momentum keeps up force. Otherwise, we're in for another 30, 25 years of really hard EJ fights, and we'll get through them and we'll make progress, but we don't really have that much time to be, wasting.
Thank you for that. Ramon?
Echo what you all said. That's great. If I gotta add something to that, it'll be, I would like to see communities working together, front lines, fence line, EJ communities working together, advancing the issues together, building power. That's something that is very much needed, building that power within the communities, as Jan was saying, empower. Very important, how can they take control of their social, economic, and environmental future? Very important. Let's remember that there's not environmental justice unless we can realize also economic and racial justice. That is very important. And also, I would like to see a flow of resources to support this work. That's something that we haven't seen in the past, and I would like to really see how can make more resources available to those front lines, fence line communities that are facing these disparities and challenges.
Absolutely. All of those responses, thank you so much. I know we are a little bit over time, but I just want to say thank you. This was a wonderful panel to moderate. You all have such a wealth of knowledge. I am learning, and you should see my paper of notes as well. And there are a lot of really great questions in the chat. So if some of these questions were not addressed, it'd be great if we could, take them. And I know Noelle is compiling them in a document that we can look at, so that we can address them later and answer them, and maybe even share your contact information so folks can get that as well on our resource page. I'm going to hand it over to the public library to close us out. Not sure who will do that.
And thank you, Carmera. I just want to add that. Thank you, Carmera.
Thank you very much.
You guys are
Carmera.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, Camara, and thank you to all of our amazing panelists for such a powerful program. And thank you to all of our participants who were able to attend today. Please feel free to check out our website for more virtual and in-person events for all ages. We'll be sharing the link in the chat in just a second. And also, we'd love to know what you think. We're going to share a link for our program feedback form in the chat as well. And please feel free to tell us what you think of this program. We really do use this information to inform what other events we host. So please feel free to take a couple of minutes to fill that out. And thank you all again for attending, and have a nice evening.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. We need a longer panel next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night. Thank you.